Awesome, John. Well, hey, man, thanks for joining. Really excited to talk to you today. There's a lot going on in this space. I have a ton of questions for you. So I was hoping maybe you just start out with a quick introduction and maybe tell us a little bit about how you got into the position you are today.
That's great. And Nick, thanks for having me on the podcast. Really been looking forward to it. Been a big fan for a while. So, John Goolgasian. My day job here at Seerist is I'm the president of Seerist Federal. So, really kind of Seerist government activities in the U.S. So, I take care of all of our U.S. federal clients, our military clients. And we recently, over the past year, we've really kind of started to expand down into state organizations as well. Yeah, how did I get here? That's a great question. So maybe a little bit of kind of my history as well. So I spent 23 years as a government employee in the intelligence community, all employed at NGA, so the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, but some time around town as well. So I spent about 9 years of my career working three different times, working out of CIA headquarters, out of NGA's counterterrorism activities there as an analyst, as a branch chief, and eventually as the director of counterterrorism there as well. And I also spent a brief 6 months, loaned executive time over at the Coast Guard as the assistant to the deputy of intelligence at the Coast Guard. Again, my NGA career did a lot of different things, everything from being an analyst to R&D activities. I was promoted initially as senior executive to the first geospatial intelligence analyst, senior executive, and then ran a number of offices and divisions across the organizations, including America, so all the Western Hemisphere work, counterterrorism, ran the Foundation GeoInt group, and then eventually director of Source. And then about 8 years ago, I kind of had one of those life moments where I was trying to decide what I wanted to do next in my career. And went to my boss at the time, Sue Gordon, and said, "Man, what's my job?" And she said, "Probably going to go do policy at the Pentagon." And at that point, I was like, "Well, not necessarily a policy guy.
Yeah.
I love to build things. I love operations." So I made the decision to leave government service and joined a company called OG Systems and took over the research and development there. And really with the idea to focus it down around a given activity, a given mission, something we wanted to create. And 8 years ago, it was a novel idea that we came up with that said, hey, we're going to use artificial intelligence to analyze open source information to kind of replicate intelligence community processes and analysis processes. While everybody's an AI company today, there's only a few folks really kind of working true artificial intelligence, 8 years ago. We built out kind of a series of prototypes that did different things, everything from satellite imagery to radio frequency to natural language processing on what you would traditionally think of as open source, news and social media and economics and things like that. After about 4 months, we developed a real strong working prototype. And then after about a year, we decided to spin out from that company and stand up our own company called Geospark Analytics. We had a single contract at $60,000 and $2 million of seed funds and a little bit of let's go. And so 7 of us started that company in 2017, been growing it ever since. So really looking at, again, the artificial intelligence processes around threat and risk intelligence. And then about 3 years ago, we met another company that did very similar things toward threat and risk, but with people, so analysts around the world. We call it control risks and really focused on commercial use cases. So long story short, a division of that company spun out that did their online analysis for threat and risk intelligence primarily with commercial companies, and we merged all of Geospark Analytics with that division of the company called Core to form Seerist. So today, Seerist is a software as a service, a platform, an API that does threat and risk analytics, both with a combination of human analysts and also of artificial intelligence on open source data, supporting about 450 clients around the world, both government and commercial organizations.
Awesome. So I was actually introduced to the company when you guys were Geospark. It was when I first saw the platform. I think it was called Hyperion back then.
Was.
All right. And I was like, wow, this thing is super neat. You guys were doing natural language processing before anywhere I'd seen it in the commercial space outside of the high-speed agencies. So it's a really impressive platform. Is it safe to summarize it like it's taking news and information from around the globe and using AI to summarize it and to categorize it into threat vectors. Is that like a good way to say it, or like what else would you add to that?
Yeah, that's a good summarization. And the way that I think about it is, especially today, anybody can bring you a big stream of news on social media. It's not hard to do. It's not necessarily unique anymore. So, technologies that just bring a stream of news or breaking news or social media and alerting to you when things happen isn't necessarily it's interesting, but it's not exciting. So we bring in that stream of open source information, news and social media and economics and different types of data. And then we run it, we've built a series of deep learning models and neural nets and now large language models around that data to do everything from classifying it, so identifying what is being talked about in that news and social media. Is it some type of disaster information? Is it has to do with crime? Does it have to do with unrest or military activities? And then, again, interesting, but then really what we do is start looking for the anomalies in the data, because that's the important thing. Looking for like activity level anomalies, so identifying, kind of think of it as indications and warning, right? Something unusual is happening in a given location that could be disruptive. The other thing that we built that was very unique to us is we had a concept that we wanted to build a threat indicator for every spot in the globe. So, what is the risk level or stability level for every city, regions, and countries in the world that's updated automatically as new information comes in? So, we built a baseline that said things like, Somalia is unstable and Sweden's stable. But every 15 minutes, as all this new data is coming in around the world, we recalculate what that stability level is for that spot, right? For the countries, the cities, the regions. And now across the US, we do every state in the country. With really that, again, that piece of news, that piece of social media, and now with the human analytics we provide, what our analysts are saying about it as well, that says the events that are happening and are they creating more or less stability for that location, and then a focus of the future. So, a forecast of the future, excuse me. So, again, a crime that happens in a high crime area or some type of violence that happens in a high violence area isn't going to change the dimensions of the stability of that location very much.
Right.
But really what it does, it looks for these micro indicators that really are leading indicators of potential disruption. And we assessed that about a year and a half ago. Actually, a government organization, an intelligence community organization, assessed how accurate are those forecasts toward major events, things like coups and conflicts.
John, could you give me an idea of like what a micro indicator would be in
Yeah,
this instance?
that's a great question. So everyone through a macro indicator, a bomb goes off,
Sure.
something like that, right? Something happens that will change levels. Those are the things that again you can alert on really easily that everybody's interested in. But by that time, it's too late, right? You're reactive toward those things. So
Right.
we wanted to look for, were there not necessarily black swan events that we could predict ahead of time, because you'll never can do that. But were there things that were happening in locations that were being talked about in news or social media? Things like economic changes, things like small level maybe protest or calls for protest around anti-government things, or some type of indicator of change, right? That as these things add up, as more and more of them happen, well, they're small and they may get lost in the mix, right? It's that needle in the haystack thing. They may get lost as individual pieces, but when you have 3 or 4 of them or more day after day after day, they add up. So let me give an
Right.
example, a real world example. Um, December of last year, I was in South Korea with with a group from the army and a program we were working there. We're out to dinner one night at Camp Humphreys outside in the city there at Pyeongtaek, and everyone's phone started going off. And it was when martial law was declared. At first, we're sitting there at dinner and
Right.
everything's fine, and we're like, "Hey, is this real or not?" Quickly realized, yep, it was real. The president declared martial law, and went back into work to figure out what's going on. Well, we looked at our system, and yeah, we picked up on that indication that breaking event that martial law was declared. But the important thing, if we looked at our system and that stability model, and we saw about a week to two before there was unusual activities that around increasing levels of protest around anti-government activity or anti-government protests. The thing did things like increase negative sentiment, increase emotions that were negative toward the government. So again, if you had a system like ours or using a system like ours, that was tuned toward looking at those things, like what are the unusual things that are happening in South Korea. About 7 days, 14 days ahead of time, you would have seen these anomalies. Not saying there was going to be martial law declared, but saying, hey, look here, something unusual is happening. That then you can apply additional human resources, right? What's your limited aspect of things to really kind of define what's happening there and pay attention to a little bit more. So you can be more prepared, you can be proactive. Maybe you can, if it's clear what's going on, you could do something about those things, if that makes sense.
Well, I think it makes perfect sense. So I mean, I use the platform. We use it at my company. Thanks to the partnership with you guys to track places where people are deployed. And I get this cool report every week. Or I get a couple of them, and I really enjoy it. What I really like about it is it's giving me kind of local knowledge as to what's happening in these various countries. My question with that is, how do you know what sources you can trust? Because it's aggregating open source information. How do you know what can be trusted in that batch of data?
Yeah, that's a great question. One that we get all the time when folks start new folks we introduce the technology to. Just for some context, we gather information from about 40,000 unique sources, right? And so that's news and social media, from the big things around the world, the BBCs, the CNNs, down to the very localized press outlets and native language around the world. Social media side, say it's very similar. You have all the big Western ones, but also an expansion of a lot of non-Western social media and some of the more the new emerging social media that may be used as an alternative, to the traditionals. So it's broad. It's a spectrum, right? So we think about it a few different ways. And we've actually been awarded some programs to help, specifically the Army, think about the sources of information, really in a mis and disinformation sense.
Right.
The first step that we go through, as I mentioned, we're a combination of human and machine analysis. We have a research team, an intelligence team, that has created an index, if you will, of reliable sources of information around the world. So we go through and human tag certain information as well. Not the report itself, but the source of that report. So is this highly reliable source, low, medium, is it untagged? And the vast majority of those 40,000, they're untagged, probably about 50% of them, because again, it's changing all the time. It's new information. But what you're able to do is then start filtering down based on those high priority ones. The other thing we do is we've created a capability where we are looking at susceptibility to misinformation. So not that, again, not an individual report has mis or disinformation in it, but that source of the information is something that is, excuse me, susceptible or has shown in the past a propensity toward misinformation toward a specific country for a specific topic as well. Then we also do things like tag. Is it, and this is automated and human driven. Is it a government controlled source? Is it from, again, kind of fringe sources, that type of thing. So you're able to go through pretty quickly and slice and dice the information, even things by like language, things like that. So you can go through and set up filters, if you will, to only move down to the information that is reliable. But also what we realize is we make all information available. Because if you're only looking at information that is deemed high reliable, you may miss nuance of, especially in the information operations sense, of what a potential adversary is trying to influence someone to think. So we make all that data available, and that way you can go through and slice and dice it to say, what does highly reliable sources say about this issue or this event? What are unreliable sources? What are sources that we are tagging that we know are susceptible to misinformation from, let's say, a particular country saying about this? So you can juxtapose those things and then potentially counteract that, or at least be aware of how different issues are being discussed.
Okay. And so a lot of that seems very dependent on local language. And this is another question I have about, you talked about analyzing all of the different social media platforms, the VT from Russia, I forget all the Chinese one, there's a million of them. How do you get a really good translation when certain words could mean different things? How does that work out?
A couple different ways, expanding ways. So traditionally, again, we auto-translate about 104 languages in our platform. So again, a piece of information comes in from a foreign source, multilingual. We're going to translate that automatically on ingestion into the platform. And anything you can query in native languages. You can look up things in, let's say, English, and it's going to find it in those native languages as well. So it's both we think about it both as a machine problem and a human problem. The machine problem, classically, we have used things like Google Translate and Amazon Translate to do those. And it's, roughly the 80-90% solution for most things. There's nuanced, things you would need in the past, you would need a translator or a linguist, excuse me. Now we're starting to move more of those translations into large language model translations and GPTs to translate. We're seeing a much better return. We're also seeing more efficiency and effectiveness and actually driving down cost of that translation. And it picks up those nuances a little bit better, right? It's trained more on the nuances of language. The last piece, we have, as I mentioned, we have analysts around the world who speak language. So we have well over 40 languages that are spoken across the company. That, again, if it's needed, something very specific is needed. We have a good team that can go through and translate those things or help with that nuance as well, especially as they write their intelligence reports on top of our AI written intelligence reports. We provide human written intelligence reports that use those native sources, both the machine translated ones, but also what our teams are translating as well, to get that as exact as possible.
Okay. I mean, that's a good answer. So basically you're saying it's a team. It's a machine human team, right? Hopefully giving some confidence to the language and the sources and all that stuff. And that makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask you, John, I've been thinking a lot about AI recently, and I use Replit and Firebase Studio and some of these things that are pumping out apps left and right. And they're not enterprise level apps or anything like that, but they can do them pretty quickly. And I was going to ask you about being, how does that feel to be in a SaaS space when it seems like eventually anyone's just going to be able to pump out an app. But I think you answered it right there, which is you have humans, and humans bring a lot to the fight that a machine just isn't going to be able to do for a long time.
Yeah, and we do, absolutely. And we do that as well, right? Our development team has been adopting more and more artificial intelligence to help with speed and efficiency and effectiveness and really kind of, it's great for onboarding and training, right? For new developers and data scientists who join the company as well, to really understand how to use like our way of doing business, our development code and things like that. So from a technical aspect, that human machine teaming is great. Again, we can get code developed much faster. We can get code developed much more effectively and efficiently as well, and really helping with standardization. On the analyst side, again, what we produce, we are human machine teaming, right? And I fully believe human machine teaming is today, and for the foreseeable future, the only way to get to real quality output, right? One of the things that we hear a lot from our clients is that they like the fact that we're both a combination of people and machines on the analytics side. We can get that speed and breadth of artificial intelligence, get that information. But then we also have that verifiable, that veracity that a person has touched this thing and helped to write it. Again, we have both machine writing and human writing in what we provide, with full sourcing on both sides, and it helps with that understanding of kind of the provenance of the information and the veracity and variety of information. We've taken a very tempered approach toward implementation of large language models, especially in the writing of intelligence reports, because we've seen some really bad stuff. And we've really done this teaming with our analysts and the machines to make it as best it can be.
Yeah, you don't want those hallucinations in an intelligence report when there's decisions being made on top of that, right?
Absolutely.
You mentioned some of the use cases for threat, but maybe give me an idea of like the different types of customers that use the platform and what they're using it for. Maybe if you have any kind of interesting edge cases, I'd be interested to hear about that as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, we have 450-ish clients around the world. So again, the use cases are pretty varied, right? It is primarily in the threat and risk intelligence in areas, and commercially, our main clients are our chief security officers of Fortune 500, 2,000 companies, really using our tech to understand threat to people, to operations, to executive protection, to supply chains around the world, right? Again, understanding if they have operations in multiple countries or they have interest in multiple countries, even with supply chain, and people are traveling to those locations. Are they safe? Are they not safe? What's happening in those areas? On the government side, our use cases are pretty varied. Again, very similar to the commercial side. We're in op centers around the world, so 24/7 operation centers. Really, again, from that stream of breaking information, but more importantly, also the contextual pieces. The contextual piece to breaking events. Again, it's not good enough anymore just to say, from an op center
Right.
perspective, something just happened. Okay, what does it mean? We're also implemented in things like disaster operation centers, to deep analytic operations, to intelligence support to operations. So we're in J3s, J39s, even J5s where they're looking at planning. A recent unique one for us is more the commercial side, but they also have a government arm there. Recently announced our API, so our data and our analytics, are feeding into the Bloomberg terminal. So Bloomberg
Hmm.
has established has acquired our content to make available as part of a trading platform, right?
Yeah.
So really looking at, as I mentioned, those risk models for countries around the world. So you can envision maybe a commodity trader or futures trader looking at what is the
Sure.
risk level to a country that controls a certain type of commodity. And then applying that to companies across those areas as well. So if I own a company and I'm operating in 25 countries around the world, what is my risk exposure, right? What is my
Mhm.
risk exposure? But also if I'm going to invest in that company, what is that company's risk exposure as well from a geopolitical and security standpoint? So it's something we always had envisioned in how we could apply some of this technology outside the main security realm into something like quantitative trading or
Mhm.
risk exposure. And we're really excited about that, and the work we've been doing in Bloomberg to expose the data into the Bloomberg terminals as well.
Well, I've heard those Bloomberg terminals are kind of ancient. Like, I've had some friends tell me they need to update their software, but it sounds like if they're bringing you guys on board, that'll be a good needed update for them. What about like the average everyday human? Obviously, a SaaS platform, you're focused on B2B and to government clients and things like that. But what about like the shop owner in Minneapolis before the riots kick off? Like, is there a way that they can benefit from either your data or maybe even just like some common sense things that they could do on their own without using the Seerist platform to prepare for stuff that they should be?
No, that makes sense. Again, we don't really do B2C today, so we're really a B2B company. But I can see how, again, more localized businesses or operations could utilize our tech. As I mentioned in the introduction, we started working this year, and we started doing a lot more outreach to state and local governments. So again, not an
Yeah.
individual, but really the application of our data and our analytics to again more say smaller scale but smaller area and more hyper focused activities as well. And it's catching on. It's gone really, really well because what we've realized, what we're realizing is that state and locals are starved for this type of information, right?
Yeah.
Ahead of a protest, in response to disasters, ahead of again different types of activities, using for things like event planning. For example, the state of Tennessee has adopted us in their fusion center, so they've used it for everything from again natural disasters and flooding to we've helped them set up schools and other important infrastructure areas to monitor for things like crime, shootings, things like that around them, all the way to event planning, like things like concerts, like
Hmm.
large scale venue activities as well. And so we're starting to see more and more of that type of adoption in more of our localized users, not necessarily the big national or international organizations as well. So we're really excited about that. Who knows? Maybe in the future at some point we'll do some direct to consumer play with a mobile app or something like that, because I can see in the future. I like to travel. I travel a lot.
Sure.
If I'm going and not necessarily to the traditional tourist areas. So for things like adventure travelers, things like business, a more smaller scale business that may be using traveling to remote areas or something like that as well.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think maybe even for some smaller companies like my company that just wants to keep an eye on our people and where they're at and make sure that they're safe if things are popping up. You talked about the amount of sources. I think you said 40,000 different sources of information that you're crunching. You have a human machine team that's putting all the pieces together and putting out these reports and things like that. Then you talked about your model for predicting threats. I love the movie Minority Report. You ever see that one?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Um, do you think we could ever be in a situation where we could actually predict, maybe not with 100% certainty, but like actually get to the point where we're predicting things into the future, a week ahead of time or anything like that based on sentiment? I don't even know. I don't even know how you would do it, but how
Yeah.
good are those predictions?
I think we'd be foolish to say that there wouldn't be some type of future prediction like that. Now, could we be able to predict ahead of time what an individual person is doing? I don't know about that. Um, one of our goals conceptually is that I always thought about it, personally, I always thought about it as a weather report, right? Weather report says, hey, it's 70 today. On Friday, it's going to be, 80 with a 20% chance of rain or a 90% chance of rain, right?
Right.
What I can foresee in the future, and especially as you train more and more data based on past events, that we'll be able to get to a point that says, here's the stability today based on and here's the things that are happening. We do that really, really well today. All right. Here's the things that are happening that are changing the stability levels as well. We do that very, very well today. Here's a short term forecast of where we see stability going, right? We see it going down, we see it going up. So more of that temperature gauge, if you associate that with kind of the weather, idea analogy. Where I see it going potentially is that we're not only saying, hey, stability is a 50 today and it's dropping, it's going to be a 40 on Friday. But what I see is, ability to do in the not too distant future is to say stability's dropping. Based on what we've seen, there's a some percent chance of unrest, right? How do
Mm-hmm.
you base that unrest? Well, that's based off of past factors. In the past, when we've seen unrest, we've seen these type of things happen. The other aspect of that, I think it makes it even closer to reality, is one of the things that we do as well is we look at we have a calendar of future events, right? We're starting to look more and more at future events, what's happened in the past, what are anniversaries of things that happened in the past, and then also again, as more and more data becomes available, you can start looking at not just the patterns and trends and try to liken those things, but also look at things like in simplistically in the language that talk about future tense, right? Things that are planned. One of the areas that, again, this is not new, this is a decade or two old. One of the things that I was involved in my government career was like the IED defeat organizations in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? And how did you do some of those things, right? We try to do predictive modeling based off of events that were happening and proximity analysis and nearest neighbor analysis and what are the things that draw back then an IED to be placed in a certain area. Well, can you apply that same theory to other things that, hey, these things have happened always around this location? Here's an area that's having those same type of events. So there's always been a
Right.
protest over here. Here's the factors of that protest that led to it, or whatever that issue is. Over here, we're starting to see similar events, similar indicators, similar things to the same thing that happened over here. So starting to look back and apply those things. I mean, I can definitely see more predictive, more focused predictive analysis, in the not too distant future, right? Especially when you're giving someone some type of confidence value in the potential of a type of event happening.
Well, it's pretty wild, and it certainly makes sense. I mean, think about what you guys do, and people are making important decisions in these localities, like a logistics person that's needs to rely on a supplier or something like that. I think that'd be super valuable information to know. Hey, this place is looking kind of nasty next month, so you might want to get your parts from somewhere else. Or I just think the value of that is infinite. What is the value of knowing ahead of time when something's going to be at risk? I think it's on top of it. You mentioned a little bit about your government customers. Obviously, that's the space I'm interested in is the intelligence community and things like that, working with the military, special operations units, and this sort of thing. Can you give me a sense of maybe how like an intelligence center can get the most value out of this type of information? I see a lot of well, across DoD especially. I think a lot of the intel centers are, let's just say, they don't live up to what I think their potential can be. A lot of it has to do with the churn of employees that go in and out of these places. But um, how do people really get the most out of using your platform in those situations?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And let me take it out of our platform for a second, and then I'll go
All
to
right.
what I've seen for adoption. What I've seen too often, both in my government career and in my post government career, is that people buy technology without really a plan to how to implement it, right? Hey, this is
100%.
cool. This is great. This is cool. This is, this, and then it's implemented, but never a thought necessarily. I shouldn't say never, not enough thought
Hmm.
around what are the TTPs around this? What is the workflow? How do I apply this to my work? How do I apply this to my existing workflow? Or does this enable me to change a historic workflow into doing something new and more
Sure.
effective? So all too often, we're just throwing technology at problems without thinking through it. So okay, great. There's the problem. There's a problem. So, and I've seen it with new technology, with things like artificial intelligence, with large language models, with
Hmm.
things like this. Hey, this is great stuff. Let's, but it doesn't change the way people are thinking and applying it. Where we've seen, and hey, there's sometimes we've seen that with our technology where it's been where the client hasn't really thought through, or we haven't provided enough detail on how to really apply it. Where we've
Right.
seen the best adoption of our tech, and we really one of the things we really focus on. We're not a company that just sells technology and walks away, right? We want to be consultative technologists, right? We want to be able to understand what your problems are. How can we help to solve them? How can we apply the technology with those? So where we've seen the best and the most highest usage of our technology implemented in areas is where we're working with the client first to understand what their workflows are, what problem they're trying to solve, and then bringing the technology in. And how does that, from a defense department, let's use the defense department side of it first, where I've seen, great adoption, because we do have a pretty vast application of our tech, right? Everything from breaking
Hmm.
events to information operations, potentially to longer term analytic products, where the first step in all this is kind of writing down what you're trying to do, and then how working with us, again, the experts to in the technology of how to apply toward those things. So as an example, combatant command that recently over the past year, we're almost a year into this contract, has taken kind of a, they bought an enterprise level of the technology, but they didn't all of a sudden just say, "Hey, everybody, we bought this thing, start using it." Right? It's really been kind of this paced and measured process to say, let's bring it into this organization first. Let's work with them to understand, again, how to use it from a indications and warning standpoint, right?
Hmm.
Developed or taken their CCIRs, or their combatant command information requirements, and then converted those into our language, right? Into our query language, if you will, and set up their CCIRs as an indicator on our platform so that it's feeding that. And it doesn't just feed like the breaking information that helps drive, the machine learning models. It helps drive the large language models that are writing intelligence reports for them as well. Then the next step, again, moving from the CCIRs into, okay, now how can we use this to help support everything from information operations to planning? So that kind of stepped approach with the first
Hmm.
step of getting the problem in. The other aspect of it where I've seen is, and I'd say probably 75 to 80% of our clients use our technology out of the box, right? Whether that's our API or our platform, without any real modifications to it. But then there's about, again, that 20-25% who ask us, hey, could we do this, right? Can we use your tech to do this? And sometimes we can just do it, yep, little tweaks with how the client's using it. And then we developed about 25% of our clients were developing some unique code around their problem set as well. So it's really, again, thinking through what the problem is they're trying to solve, and, developing unique solutions around that. And whether that's just as simple as, I shouldn't say simple, but, is it adding additional data sets that we don't currently have, running them through our existing, modeling, asking our analysts to look at a problem that they may not have looked at before, or again, developing unique deep learning models around those problems. So it goes beyond, because the type of technology we use, develop, type of work, your company, my company does, is not let's sell Microsoft Word into an organization. Everybody can type, right? It's really kind of developing some bespoke things from time to time as well.
So if I'm a JT and my warrant officer brings me this new like piece of tech, like based on your experience, like what should that J2 be asking that warrant officer about this new piece of technology?
That's a great question. How does it make my life better? Right? That's the easiest. I mean, or how does it make the boss's life better? How does it increase my understanding of warning? Right? How do I get ahead of issues? How do I get How does this help me answer a specific hard problem that I haven't been able to answer in the past? Is it really making my life easier? Can I do, we always heard the do more with less.
Hmm.
Nobody can do more with less. But does it help offset again, because it kind of help offset where I might have some type of cut so that I can focus somewhere else, right? That's where I like to think of our tech as well. We can help people with their existing things. But if we can help automate some of the processes that weigh them down and take up their precious resource, right? Their most ultimate resource is their people and their time their people have. There's but so many hours in the day. So can we shave 10% time off of a rote task? Can we completely, offset a rote task that doesn't have to be done? Let the system analyze those things and then tee up, you know, again, the anomalies so that a person can look at it instead of the person having to go in there. So if I was the J2, I'm asking, how does this streamline my work? How does this streamline my existing work? Or how does it help me offset things that I have to do with people today so that I can shift those people to higher order thinking, right? Too much, I still think too much of from the intelligence community, defense department, homeland security community, too much work is still done on some of the very basic things. Too much brain power is still spent on basic things where we should really be automating that, those intelligence cycles, challenging our teams to say not what has happened or where the forecast of those things happened, but challenge them to say, what does this mean to the command? So if I'm the J2, does the technology help my people rise above? And then instead of reporting what's happened, can they say, now this is what it means for the command, right? This is what it means for, foreign policy. This is what it means for military posturing. This is what it means for et cetera, et cetera.
That's such a great point about the fact that even today with all these tools, I have on my computer over here, I probably have 5 AI apps open right now. I have Claude and Grok and ChatGPT and Gemini and all of them. I'm always using them, just trying them out for various things or using them for work. But it still seems like on the Intel side, especially, that's because that's my background. You have kind of a broader swath of customers you support, but my background's Intel. Today, we still are just doing a lot of the things you're talking about. Like we're spending a lot of time putting things in spreadsheets or building a PowerPoint slide, and it's like, okay, well, what's the value of that? And it would be great if we get to the point where the computer can do that stuff, and then the human can kind of do the things you're talking about. Tell the story as to why it matters. Maybe eventually we'll get there. I don't know. Maybe one day we'll get away from PowerPoint. That's my ultimate dream, John. Is we just get rid of PowerPoint. If I could delete PowerPoint from the universe, that would be something I do right after Excel spreadsheets. But it is what it is. Talking more about the J2, like how would you get into, like if you're in the ops center, right? How does Seerist maybe help them get into like a more proactive approach to things? Like how does that work? Because we talked a little bit about like the Minority Report situation, right? Where maybe it eventually can do some super specific forecasting. But if I'm an Intel person and I'm using the platform, and let's say we're doing collection in an area, how am I using that platform to get that proactive stance, get ahead of the commanders' questions?
No, that's great. And we are just over the past year, we've been working as part of 3 groups in a project called Project SAURON. So Project SAURON, started by the Army Hard Targets team, was really looking at a better way to do indications and warning, really like kind of a digital ISR approach, right? Of helping these things. And it was interesting because one of the original meetings, they brought us into the Pentagon and showed us because the person running the program had been a watch officer at the NMCC and at different combatant commands and different places around. So he had seen it from a lot of different angles, op centers, and then kind of walked us through the state of the art. Hey, there's a tweet about something, halfway around the world. There's a news report on, the TVs are on, and we've all been to the op centers, right? There's always a social media feed. There's CNN and BBC and Al Jazeera on. There's, some classified sources of something bespoke. And Of course, none of them talk together, right? And of course, when one triggers, if there's like a social media feed and, of a tweet about, or an X, excuse me, whatever you call an X, there's
Who
an
knows what
X.
you call it? That's
I
still a
don't know.
tweet, I think. I don't know.
Sure, we'll still call it a tweet. So if there's a tweet about something, the point he was making is they get that alert, right? Through large programs that acquire those things for the Defense Department. But then they have to go on this march of first confirming it's real. Well,
Hmm.
one, separating the noise, the real things from the noise, then confirming if it's real, then going through different, and that takes different sources at different security levels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And then it's to that question, does it fit the CCIRs, does it fit the CCIRs or the PIRs that have been set for that op center too? To ultimately make the call, especially if you're the watch officer in the middle of the night, do I wake the boss up at 2 a.m. to say, ma'am, sir, this just happened, right? So
Hmm.
he kind of laid this problem out for us. So we started thinking about it as how can we help to do this differently? Through our applications like ours, again, we get that breaking information, right? We get that tweet, we get that news report, we get these things. But what we do differently, and a lot of technology stopped there, right? This just happened. Now go somewhere else to figure it out. What we try to do is help you figure it out, right? We try to say, is it from a valid source? Is it from an invalid source? How is it contextualized, right? We have 12 years worth of information from our validated information, verified information from our analysts. So you can go back in and say, yeah, this happened, but it's within the normal pattern of things that happen in this area, right? Also, we're starting to develop like what we call cluster analysis or super clusters of information that are helping to validate those things as well. So yes, we have analysts that are validating things, but we don't have an endless supply of analysts to validate everything that's happening around the world. So we're doing things like cluster analysis that allows us to say, hey, this new piece of information just came in. It's a news post, it's a social media tweet, or it's
Hmm.
a social media post. It's a piece of analysis of one of our analysts wrote as well. And then the algorithms automatically start to cluster that information based on similarities in that data. So, and then start tracking a history of that over time as well. So we're immediately starting to see connections of information without building these massive taxonomies and ontologies and
Hmm.
things that are I've seen so many times that people try to build these huge taxonomies of information and never get through it to create this link analysis and things like this. So these links are being made immediately so that when something happens, it's self-valid it's either self-validating because it's pulling in all the other information, and then you link that in with what we talked about earlier. Hey, is this from a verifiable source, right? Is it from a highly reliable source? Is it all coming from unknown sources, from potentially known state controlled, known misinformation sources as well? So you start not only to say that something's happening, but you can put it into context historically, you can put it into context with everything else that's happening in those areas, so that you can come up with, again, a true indication and not a false indication of
Hmm.
something that's happening as well. Then you bring that into an ops center. And then how do you apply that? As I mentioned, you put those CCRs and the PIRs inside of it. And then the system starts to generate those for you and then alert you toward those things as well. And then give you that background. Well, let me see this thing and then what's happened across the last few minutes, the last day, the last 48 hours, the last 60 days, the last 6 years, right? That are associated with this
Hmm.
event that's happening in a given area as well.
Well, that's super interesting, and it's always funny to note just how nerdy Intel people. Everything's named after Lord of the Rings. Can we just stop at the Lord of the Rings names? I
We'll get some
think
Star Wars. We'll get some Star Wars stuff in there as well.
I'm sure, I think there's enough of that too. I
Probably
think we work
yes.
with a contract called C3PO, and there's another one called R2D2. Whatever. We love our acronyms in this space, don't we? That just kind of is what it is. So, I think a lot about. I go on X a lot just to I use it a lot for news mainly. I don't post as much as I do just read news on there. And one of the things I notice actually really like is the community notes feature where, two people kind of from each side of the aisle have to agree that, yeah, this is actually the truth about it. Is there something like that in your platform where, I know you mentioned the humans. Is that kind of what they're doing on some of this information?
Not exactly,
Maybe
but
not politically, but,
right, right, right,
at
right,
least,
right.
at least from a truth perspective.
So that's great. I haven't thought about it that way, but I'd say two things to that. One, that clustering algorithm that I mentioned works on our human analysis as well. So, for example, again, we do everything from our teams of people do everything from breaking events, validating a breaking event with a
Yeah.
trusted source of information, to kind of deep analysis, right? Hey, I'm going to write a multi-page report on, the latest, Israel-Iran issue or something like that. What's really interesting though is what the way this algorithm works. It will take that report and then continue link new information to it. So if that report was, let's say, posted a week ago, that human written report, new news and social media that is connected with that thing will start to append onto it automatically. And then you can
Okay.
also, the large language models can start to create new written reports on that as well. So you have the valid source, but then you also have what's being published about this thing, and whether it's from a highly reliable source or a low reliable source. But then also the large language models are starting to write updates. So if that human written report was again published a week ago, and over the last week there's been 1,000, 5,000, or however many new pieces of information related to that thing, the model starts to write updates to that as well. So not appending that human written report, but writing a separate report. So you can take both of those things, bring them in, and see kind of the how they juxtapose. But then also just on the algorithmic side, as I mentioned, we have again the different reliability levels of our report of our sources. The clustering algorithm also clusters those things together. Hey, you can weed out. You can say, hey, only show me the highly reliable, only show me low reliable. But it allows those things to come together so that you can see what is the totality of that information. Again, is it exactly doing what you're saying? Not really, but it's an automated way that you get both sides of the story, if you will, as well, and continue to add on towards stories that have maybe been written in the past.
Do you ever think that we would get to a point where we could actually trust anything in the news or even on social media or whatever? I think about a lot, like if I go on X and look at like what somebody from Congress is putting out, right? This is somebody in Congress, let's say, and what you'll see a lot of times is they'll comment on a certain situation, okay? And I don't want to, this isn't necessarily a political question. It's just about getting to the ground truth of things, which is what I'm interested in. You'll see them put out like something, right? Like they'll comment on something, and maybe like a part of it is true, right? But then the rest of it is just kind of lead in. Like you'll be more susceptible to believe it because this one little part is true. Like it's like, this guy wore red socks, therefore he hates, I don't know, the Cleveland Indians or something, right? Like there always seems to be this like a shred of truth with people like this that have an agenda and they're trying to push a narrative in a certain way. So I guess the real question is 100% truth even possible? And then second, how do you defend against like foreign actors that are trying to push narratives, or anybody that's trying to push narratives into your platform, and ultimately it all comes down to that trust in the source, I guess. But how does that work?
A lot to unpack there. So let's
Yeah, it's a lot. I know. I'm sorry. It was a long question. It took me a second to get through it.
No, it's a great question, and maybe I'm too much of an optimist. In the realm of truth, and in the age when people say the truth is a thing of the past. I think back to also my middle school and high school history classes, and thinking of things like yellow journalism and things like that. Right? I don't believe in fake news. I believe there's propaganda. Propaganda's been around since probably the first people started writing, or the first two tribes that were in different areas were trying to influence each other. So I don't think it's anything new. I do think there's just a proliferation of it on a scale that we've never seen before, right? Which makes it seem worse, which probably is worse, in that sense. I was watching the news, and I want to say which network recently, but in our realm there was a news report about Elon Musk and X getting a $200 million government contract for the use of Grok, right? And it was all this terrible about Grok. Well, one, yes, technically that's true, but that award was to about 5 or 6 different companies in the AI space, including ChatGPT, including all these things. And it wasn't guaranteed to be $200 million. It was a 90 IQ. So someone took that grain of truth, X won a part of an IDIQ.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And just while you're on the subject, anybody that posts that they've won hundreds of millions of dollars and it's a multi-award IDIQ, this is your warning. We're watching you.
Yeah, we're watching. Right. So this was the news report. This news report was about, oh my God, we're rewarding Elon Musk all this. That's crazy. It was crazy, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it was just like, take that piece of truth and
saw
spend
that.
it the
Yeah.
way you want to. Again, how do we defend, again, I think against, potential, and that's somebody just getting their political opinion across, right? The worst part, I think the more dangerous piece, well, that is dangerous and things like that. The dangerous piece for us as a nation, our security, is what is the information that a foreign bad actor wants to put into our environment, right? And
Hmm.
whether that's foaming discontent between our government political entities or our people, or a foreign policy issue. How do you defend against that? I think the best way to defend against that from a technology standpoint is not to eliminate it. I'm asked often, well, can you guys get rid of all the, again, fake news or propaganda, whatever you want to call it, right? I think that's one. Anybody who thinks that way is thinking incorrectly. You have to know the challenge really should be, the question really should be, is how can you tag it? How can you raise it to me? How can you make me understand the difference between um, you know fact, unfact, or versions of fact? As you said, hey, there's a piece of fact in there, but then it's twisted a different way. So let me give an example of something we helped a client produce about a year, 18 months ago. Again, investments in Africa are well known,
Hmm.
relationships in Africa are well known. About 18 months ago or so, China, for the series of African countries that China implemented some debt refinancing, right? Trying to
Hmm.
offset their debt that they owe them. When we looked at it through our system, and we're able to filter down by things like Chinese language or Chinese sources, or outlets that are susceptible to Chinese influence, whether it's in China or outside of China. What we saw when we looked at these African debt refinancing reports was things like high levels of positive sentiment, things like in the emotional sense, like joy and excitement about this debt refinancing. Then we
Hmm.
looked at it through a lens and filtered out things like, well, show me the francophone, because again, languages. Show me, English versions of it. Show me blah 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 about the same issues, about reports coming out from about the same exact issue. And then we saw the opposite. We saw things like fear and anger over these things and resentment. So I don't think it's necessarily trying to identify what's truth, because as you said, even in this case, hey, China did debt refinancing, right? It helped, again, offset some immediacy of debt by these African countries. But it's how it's portrayed from a long-term impact sense that we got to be able to understand. So from a national security standpoint, we can take something like that and say, well, hey, what is our opportunity here to help, right? Is our opportunity here either
Hmm.
to offset the narrative, with some type of counter information, or what does this present a foreign policy opportunity for us? Does it present a last resort? Is there an impending military operation, sense to this? So I think it's understanding those narratives, how those narratives are playing out, again, and then how do we take advantage, or how do we try to offset those narratives in the way that's more beneficial to us and to democracy across the world? There's probably not a lot of complete fake, right? Again, as you said, it's
Right.
probably twists of truth, right?
Well, I think that's probably the best propaganda, right? Is when you can take something that's true or a slice of something that's true, because it leaves credence to anybody that looks into it a little bit further. Ah, he was wearing those red socks or whatever,
Right.
you know. So that's pretty interesting. Speaking of China, and I have a lot of questions I could ask about China. What do you think about TikTok in general?
Okay, whether it's stealing our information, I'll leave that to people much smarter with more access to me than me. You can obviously from the adoption of TikTok around the world, it's important, right? It's an important to understand what is being communicated on there, and then how to leverage that communication as well. So for our aspect, it's really looking at it as, again, is there information on TikTok that we can use to help people understand, again, geopolitical stability or risks or things like that, from what people are posting. It's not necessarily the biggest political outlet in the world, but there are still things that are valid inside of it. So it's weeding through the noise, and that's the case for most social media, right? Whether
Mhm.
it's I don't care about people posting a picture of their food on their X post, right? I care about what the, again, implications for risk and stability about something. So it's weeding through the noise to get to really what is important, and whether that's from something like TikTok or you know X, or pick your platform, VK, as you talked about. That's what we care about.
Have you seen the new Superman movie yet?
I've not.
All right, I'm not going to spoil the movie, but there's a scene in the movie where Lex Luthor has an army of monkeys, and they're on the computer like posting stuff, right? What do you think about that type of, maybe not monkeys, but maybe AI, or maybe even just an army of humans
Right.
that could put out information against, for things that they want to influence, or
Yeah.
back to that J2, right? Things, how do you prevent influence from actors that are pushing these narratives, and how
Yeah.
would the system maybe weed it out, or how do you think about it? How about that?
That's a great question. So whether it's an AI generated information, or a human backed troll farm, right, that is trying to influence something with setting up fake profiles that I'm a live in the Midwest, or I live in
Hmm.
Nigeria, and I'm going to post against this, or I'm going to post against that. Yeah, that's a real threat, right? That's a real issue that we know has been used, right?
Hmm.
Used around the world. How do you defend against that, or how do you make the J2 or whoever aware of those things? A couple ways, right? Some of it is manual to understand from a human aspect of rating of validity of sources, and then we've worked with some partner companies to integrate some of their technology that looks at things like social authenticity, and could we build our own social authenticity models as well? So when does a new how old is a an account, right? Is this account
Hmm.
all of a sudden spun up over the past week or month or whatever, and is starting to post massive amounts of information about a specific event, right? There's some easy telltale signs of trolls, or of AI generated posts as well. It's the ones that persist, that haven't been identified yet, that are the more concerning ones that you have to try to identify. So I don't know if there's a necessarily an easy button around those things, but there are some tactics to identify what is new, or what is potentially a troll, what is potentially an AI driven influencer, if you will, and then try to identify those. They're getting better. So I think it's one of these cat and mouse things, right? It's this game where we're going to be able to identify them faster, and then they're going to change their tactics and be more elusive to those things as well. So I don't think there's going to be one solution to any of this in the not too distant future.
I was really happy to see more recently that the Trump administration is focusing on agriculture as a security avenue, I guess you could say. Uh, talking about like the Chinese-owned farmland and that sort of thing. When you think about feeding a country of 350 million people or whatever we are now, how does maybe the platform help with that sort of situation, like monitoring things like food sources and scarcity and that sort of scenario?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. It was almost. I'll go back and tell a story. Kind of, we don't consider ourselves a disease necessarily, technology, but we did some really
Right.
interesting things during COVID, and I'll kind of relate it to that.
Mm.
Let me talk about that first. So again, we gather information around disease and disease outbreak primarily, right? Now, I'm going to get to the food safety piece, but let me liken it to the
Hmm.
COVID work we did. So we bring in this type of data, and we have access to all kinds of data and things like that. And one of the things we saw, like during the initial outbreak of COVID, was groups like John Hopkins were doing really amazing things with looking at the spread of the disease and things like that. But what we saw was missing across the board wasn't so much this is where the disease was going, or this is where outbreaks were, or this is reports about those things, but was more of the multivariate approach toward, hey, we shouldn't, and it was the problem sense, right? So it was a problem of everyone was trying to identify back then, where do we put PPE, right? Where do we put in for,
Hmm.
where do we put supplies to help offset this? And the problem we saw was, hey, people were rushing to where the outbreaks were. That wasn't necessarily where you needed it, right? Where you
Right.
needed it, where there were shortages. So there could be areas where there was a big outbreak in a city, large city, which makes sense. but they had plenty of hospitalization. They had plenty of ways to deal with this. Where the real risk was maybe that second or third tier city or location that had smaller outbreaks that didn't bubble up and as a hotspot, but had no way to deal with it. So we built models that looked at both the outbreak but also the supply chain to say this is where you need to focus. So I would actually think about it very similar, like the food security piece, right? And it's really not looking at a single variant piece to this, but it's really building a multivariate model to look at what are the various factors that could impact food production, and actually it's not really so much food production, it is, but it's about again the availability of food to population centers, right? So it's everything from drought to long-term climate change to short-term weather to supply chain to keep bringing all the different factors into again disease that affects plants and animals as well, livestock. And then what is that transportation route through those from the supply chain centers to the population sectors? So if I was to really dive a little bit deeper into food safety and food security, or water safety, water security, would really kind of want to think about it as this multivariate piece, because that's really what we do. Like our risk models, our stability models, are a multivariate model that looks at all the events that are happening in a given area, right? Whether that's economic or security, or weather. So I would actually think about it the same way, and then really define the factors instead of doing a geopolitical risk model or a COVID risk model.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the food risk model, if you will, and what are those things? And are you trying to assess the impact to, a city from food, a city of 10 million people, and what is their ability to, have food security? Or are you looking at, the grain production in Iowa, right? So it's got to be both. It can't be one or the other. And I think too much that I've seen, and I'm no expert,
Mm-hmm.
is focused on what is the impact of that supply center, not necessarily the demand center. So kind of what we saw in the same idea with the COVID. We're looking at outbreak centers, not demand centers. So I would actually look at it both ways and try to develop that out again with the experts, right? To really understand what those questions are.
Is there a way to look at all this Chinese farmland in the United States and see what they're up to?
If you know ownership records, you could probably do something for sure.
I think that's pretty telling. It's pretty obvious that they've intentionally purchased this land around our military installations. Almost kind of silly. What's next for you guys? Like, what's the next moving forward? Like, what can you tell us about what you're working on?
Yeah, no, that's great. Like a lot, we're trying to figure out, not figure out, we're implementing now how we're thinking about agentic and
Mm-hmm.
AI and assistance, into our tech as well. I think whether it's AI or redesign, I think it's really where we're focused is a lot about the simplicity model, right? How do we have so much information. Our UI is really elegant
Yeah.
and really easy to use, but how can we make it easier? How can we make it better? How can we tune it around your issue, right? Without having, people that have to come in and tune it around your issue. Nick, you mentioned like your team uses it for things like looking at where your people are around the world and the risk to those people. Well, somebody else is using it for supply chain, while somebody else is using it for this. So one of the things we're really focused in on is those workflows
Mm-hmm.
and how much can we automate those things so that when you come in and, hey, I want to, whether it's through a chat mechanism or some type of setup wizard, that
Mm-hmm.
you can come in and say, I'm interested in, I have 50 people around the world in these locations. I just want to know their risk, right? So how can we work? We're really focused in on a lot of that type of thing. Focused in on again connections across all of our content, so that when you want to know what's happening in a given area, you're not just asking for hey, tell me the latest breaking event in this area, but you're really getting the fulsome understanding of that location as well.
So in with all this new AI stuff coming out, and I watched the most recent Grok release videos, like Elon and some of his engineers talking about. He believes by the end of next year, Grok and probably even some of the other models are going to be making scientific discoveries. Like this is how advanced we are that quickly. Where do you foresee the maybe not even serious, but just like the threat landscape in, let's say, 5 years, 6 years. Like, it sounds like it's not that far in the future, but the way that AI is moving now, especially on the commercial internet, I want to talk about the government systems.
Yeah.
They're still coming online, but like, where do you see us going?
So I think there's threat and opportunity, right?
Mhm.
And everything like this. Again, the threat piece, again, when the wall came down in the early '90s, we went from this, bipolar world to this multipolar world, right? And everybody was
Mhm.
worried about, hey, there's going to be this, like, all these threat actors, and there's way more threat actors today than there was then, right? Russia hasn't gone away, rising China, Iran, North Korea, etc. But you can still understand kind of terror, transnational organized crime and terrorism. You can
Yeah.
understand those things. I think again, with the advancements of these things, you're just going to see people who are intent to disrupt will be able to disrupt faster. And what does that disrupt mean, right?
Mhm.
Or, is that a disruption? Again, from a perception standpoint, is it creating technology that could disrupt? Is it a faster move toward, again, nuclear? Is it a faster move toward some type of, CBW, if you will, or is it just a faster move toward cyber attack, which could be, as devastating as any of those things? I think those are just going to move forward exponentially. That require different kind of counter to that as well, and whether that is a more active counter, or is it, again, the whole of government approach toward really, hey, the best way to create peace is to create a coalition that is all aligned to the same goals, right? So again, our challenge as a nation, as a world, is to create those closer, in my opinion, to create those closer coalitions so that everyone
Mhm.
has the same goals, that there's no reason to be counter to each other. From an opportunity sense, again, going back to our realm, kind of in the intelligence and the operations piece, I think you have this opportunity ahead of us to really rethink how we operate as a community, how we think about both the art and science of intelligence and defense and things like that. For too long, and I saw it recently, and I'll go on a little bit of a tangent. I saw recently in a document, in a requirements document, the word, dead. It was like, wow, we're still going down that road, right?
Yeah.
How do we blow that up, right? I mean, I don't say you blow it up in the sense of, hey, there's valid pieces to all those things. But if we're still talking about it in this linear fashion of tasking, collection,
Right.
processing, exploitation, dissemination, etc., we've lost, right? I mean, how do you build? How do we take advantage of the growth of artificial intelligence to really create this dynamic, interactive capability that hops from one part of that spectrum to another to counter those quick
Mhm.
movements, right? Because as you just said, hey, and with the advancements in artificial intelligence and the ability to create and discover new things, we have to be able to counter those things just as fast. And if we stick to it, I don't think our challenge so much is controlling the advancement of the technology. I think our challenge, again, in the realm that we play in, intelligence and operations, is to rethink how we approach those things, right? I mean, there's going to be some type of reimagination, I believe, of intelligence, a reimagination of how the community is organized, a reimagination of how the interaction of processes play. It has to be, or, again, the challenges are going to grow too fast if we don't change the way that we think and approach those challenges.
That's a great point. And just thinking it might have been my first or second episode. I talked with Robert Clark about this. I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Clark, but former CIA guy, wrote the book on geospatial intelligence. And he kind of describes it more as like building a sandcastle together, like the intelligence picture. And then, as new pieces come on, you can add new pieces to the castle. And I think that makes a lot of sense in that regard. I do think as a whole, and we need to really reconsider the way that the intelligence community is set up across the board. I think it's completely redundant in certain areas. You have multiple agencies looking at the same thing, buying licenses from the same companies. There's so much redundancy, and that's probably the same, across the DoD as well. But I think the IC as a whole just needs to just reset, like have some smart minds come to the table and say how should we think about these problems differently, and maybe even move into I think the cloak and dagger era is over. You're always going to have a need for classification, of course, but like your platform, there's better information on Cirrus than on Sipper. It's just the OSINT space is so fertile for good information, reliable intelligence that I see still adapting to it, trying to figure it out. What do we do with this new toy here? I really think we need to move into more of like a like we already have the combatant commands, right? Like just move into more of a geographic focused intel community as opposed to doing it by int, which I think made sense back in the 60s, but now I just don't think it I don't think it holds water. There's still different vectors for collecting intelligence and things like that, but I just think the technology now has just changed everything.
Yeah, couple comments to that. I don't want to say who it was, but we recently provided a demo to a former PDB briefer.
Mm-hmm.
And after seeing kind of what we do and understanding kind of, our data, our technology, and what is obviously in the PDB on a daily basis, the comment was someone with full understanding of how to use your technology could pretty much replicate 7 out of 10 PDB briefs, like just with our technology. And
Yeah.
then, and whether it's our technology or some other OSINT, AI drive, other OSINT, that's a good thing, right? In my opinion, that's a good thing because then you can really focus, you can shift a number of things, shift the gravity center, shift the funding, become much cheaper in the production of intelligence, and really focus in on only those things and only
Right.
that really unique technology collection, assets to, access to human assets that only the intelligence community can do, right?
Right.
And then become very focused on those things. The other aspect, and I like that idea of the sandcastle, right, that you mentioned. Hey, there's different pieces to the sandcastle, but I want to think about it differently. But I like the idea of sand. Why has or how has things like Grok and ChatGPT and Llama and all the different ones that are coming out, how have they been so powerful? Because they haven't, and again, this is simplistic, they haven't thought about it as this piece of information and this piece of information and this piece of information. It takes that sand and pours it all together. So the sandcastle isn't, a tower here and a tower here and the bridge here. It pours it all together and then it learns from all the pieces of sand, right? And then comes up with the answer. So think of that, in a sense of, we've always had stovepipes in the community. How can we use technology today to break down those stovepipes so that, you can apply um, technology across all those things because it can learn it, it can understand it, right? We got to put the protections, you got to put the guardrails, you got to put all those things up, right? But the vast majority, as we all know, the vast majority of that data doesn't have to be controlled at the highest levels, right? I mean, it has to be classified, it has to have access controls for certain things, but for the majority of it, if we're able to open it up, if we're able to turn algorithms on it, like what we build, what other people build, I mean, you're going to be able to get faster answers. You're going to have less surprise. You're going to have less intelligence. There's no such thing as intelligence success, as we all know. It's only failures, right? So how do we reduce failures? How do
Right.
we eliminate surprise? And I think the way to do that is by opening these things up and applying the technology that we have today that we never could do before. It would be interesting to look at some of the large issues from the past, whether it was 9/11 or Benghazi or something else, to say, hey, if
Right.
all this information was available, could it have been addressed, right? Would we have been able to bubble it up? Was somebody smart enough to ask the right question, right? Because none of these technologies, whether it's ours or someone else's, can answer a question you can't ask. You have to be able to ask the question still today. And what is that question? It still takes that person to say, what is it? Is it the anomaly, right? Is it the tell me the location of something? So are we smart enough to ask the right questions? And are we smart enough to allow data to live together so that you can answer those questions?
And at the end of the day, it's still a human that's going to make the decision, even if you have all the right data and knowledge. On a previous episode, I had Rick Prado on. He was the chief of ops at CIA, in charge of the Bin Laden surveillance while he was in Africa. It came down to the point where he said, from his perspective, it was like a no-brainer that they needed to kill Bin Laden. It didn't have the political will for that to happen. So at the end of the day, it's still a human, right? They knew, like, this guy's bad. He's planning something. He's going to do something to the United States, but there was still just not the political will there to do something. So who knows? Well, cool, man. Hey, John, that's super neat. Thanks for coming on. How can people reach you? Where should they check out your stuff?
Oh, yeah, no, great. And Nick, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. How do you reach us? So www.seerist.com. You can go see, our main website. lots of blogs, lots of information on there. And you can reach out to me at john@seerist.com and would love to be able to talk to anybody or kind of walk them through kind of what we do.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to put John's information in the description. So if you want to just copy and paste that or click the link to chat with John, make sure you do that. And John, really appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, Nick.
All right.